Okay, so today we're going to be discussing the states of matter. So let's start with what they are. So what are the types of matter? There are three types. There is a solid, a liquid, and a gas. So we're just going to go through each and describe like what makes them fit into that particular category. So a solid has a fixed volume and shape. So this means that the amount of the material is going to be the same no matter what. It's going to be that volume, and it's also going to have the same shape. So you can see like the ice cube, it has the same amount of volume, it has the same shape. So let's move on to liquid. So a liquid has a fixed volume but not a fixed shape. So the way to think of this is like a glass of water. So if you put water into a variety of different glasses, Tupperwares, you can put the same amount of water in two different looking containers and it will still have the same amount of water, but it will look different based on the shape of the container because a liquid takes the form of whatever it's placed in. And then lastly, we have gas. So gas does not have a fixed shape or a fixed volume. So it basically just takes up what is given to it. So if you think about air, like it just takes up the space that's there. So it doesn't have a fixed shape because you can't really see it. So it doesn't really have one, and the way the molecules are, but we'll get into that later. And then it does not have a fixed volume. So now let's look at molecule structure. Like I kind of talked about a little bit, but we're going to get more in depth. So let's start with solid. So solid molecules are very structured. So you can see that these are put into columns and rows that are tightly put together. Because solids, as we saw, they have a fixed shape. So it makes sense that their molecules are in a structured fashion. So then let's go to liquid. So liquid molecules, you can see that they're closer to one another, but they don't really have a defined shape, but they still like are together. So this is semi-structured because you can see that they aren't in those defined columns and rows like it was for a solid, but they're still close enough together that it kind of just looks like a blob. So then let's look at gas. So these molecules have no structure. Just like we talked about when like a gas fills a room, like air, they don't have any structure to them because they don't have a fixed volume, they don't have a fixed shape. So it wouldn't make sense that their molecules had a fixed position. So you can see they just kind of fill up what they have, kind of just floating around. So next we're going to look at how you change from these states. So how do you go from like a solid to a gas to a liquid, so and so. So let's start with melting. We're going to go through all six, but we're going to start here. So melting is when you go from a solid to a liquid, and this is done by adding heat to the material that is given. So an example would be ice cream. When ice cream comes out when you first scoop it out, it's a solid, it's cold, but then as soon as you expose it to some heat, it starts to melt and turn more into like a liquid. Okay, so now we're on to condensation, which is when a gas goes to a liquid. So this would be when something is cooled down. So an example of this is when you're outside on a hot summer day and you have a cold water bottle and it starts to, we mostly call it like sweat, when there's like water beads on the outside. And it's because the air has cooled down to the water bottle due to how cold your water is, and it creates that condensation, those water beads. Next we have evaporation, which is basically the opposite. This is when a liquid goes to a gas. So this is by adding heat to a liquid and it heats it up enough that it becomes a gas. So an example of this would be boiling water. You get steam. Once the water gets so hot, it turns into like water vapor. And then next we have sublimation. So this is going from a solid to a gas. This isn't as common, but it's good to know. So an example of this is dry ice. You might see people use around Halloween. They put it in cauldrons and it makes this like smoky kind of like appearance to it. And it's literally jumping from a solid. It doesn't go to a liquid. It just goes straight to a gas. So it's very unique. And then we have desublimation, which is going from a gas to a solid, which is also doesn't happen very often, but you're skipping that step of liquid because the conditions have to be so extreme and the materials have to be so specific to do that. And lastly, we have freezing, which I think you guys are very familiar with. So this is a liquid to a solid. So this is making something colder to the point where it freezes. So an example, when winter comes around, ponds will freeze over because they've gotten to that point where they're so cold that it has to change states. So I've linked a website for you guys that has a couple games where you can go through solids, liquid, and gas and like learn more about them just to refresh. So this is the website you can click on. And then lastly, just all the images I used were from Google, but here are the links. And that's it. I wish you guys the best of luck.